achieved.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in and listening. As always, I'm Scott Johnson for Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions, and I'm doing a post-fight podcast for UFC 167, fresh off the heels of that controversial main event finish. I'll be talking about all the fights, and obviously the big fight that everyone's talking about today and will be for the next little while, the George St-Pierre, Johnny Hendricks title fight. Before I get into my fight-by-fight breakdowns, overall I went 6-6 in the event, and that extends my slump to 4 consecutive events. So I had a good run of 14 or 15 straight shows of above 500, and now I had 3 straight shows of below 500, and this one where I was right in the middle, which obviously, depending on your opinion, the main event, I could have easily been 5-7. It wasn't a good night. I started off very strong, winning 5 of the first 6 fights, with my lone loss being Will Campuzano, and then I struggled only winning 1 of the last 6 fights, so it just definitely fell apart. The bet packs did not do well, and overall, it just wasn't a good showing as far as predictions were concerned. The event on a whole was pretty entertaining. I enjoyed it very much. I don't want to make excuses, but certainly a couple things attributing to my struggles of late. We had 3 events in a week and a half, which is a lot to prepare for. Additionally, with my job outside of MMA predictions, it's just been a hectic time for me. I haven't been able to put that much time into the website. As you've seen, I've scaled back a number of things I am doing in the site just because I do not have the time to offer the website that I would like to, and I just have to make cutbacks in order to still do predictions because that's kind of the most important part, and I hope you guys can appreciate and understand that. And from all the support and all the great emails I always get, people telling me they like what I do, I believe you are, that's going to be fine. All right, so let's take a quick look at some of the other fights, and before we get to the big ones on the card. Gian Villante versus Cody Donovan. Donovan came out very strong to kick it off. I had Gian Villante by knockout. Villante came back, round 2, scored the knockout, so that was off to a pretty decent start for me. Second fight, Sergio Pettis against Will Campuzano. I took Campuzano in the upset. He lost a gritty decision. Pettis looked good. He didn't overwhelm him by any stretch of the imagination. Didn't blow him out of the barn like the odds suggested he would. And, Campuzano had a good showing for himself. That 1 week notice kind of caught up to him. And Pettis just had more impactful strikes overall. But the 30-27s I thought were a joke. I thought Campuzano took at least 1 round in that fight. So I thought that was a little unnecessary on the judges and the start of the controversial judging. Jason High, Anthony Lapsley. I had High by submission. Clearly had lots of opportunities. Was fairly dominant until he got put in some bad positions in the second round. But nonetheless, he got the better of it and took the decision. Eric Perez, Edwin Figueroa. I took Perez. I think I had him by submission, but these guys were cracking, throwing bombs, and Perez just was the more refined and capable fighter overall, and got the nod as a result. So at that point, I'm 3-1. Rick Story, Brian Ebersol. This one played out exactly as I expected to, with Story just having more horsepower behind his strikes, doing damage, hurting Ebersol with some leg kicks, which was a nice little wrinkle to his game. Picked up a must-need win. Ebersol looked a little rusty and out of it for a guy that had been out of action for 17 months, which should have been expected. That improved my record to 4-1. Talis Leites, Ed Herman. I took Leites by submission, I believe, but the decision wasn't that shocking. Again, it played out very similar. He had some good success on the feet, and overall, he was just the better grappler, put Herman in some bad spots, and just dominated that fight till the bitter end. 5-1. Up next, Donald Cerrone, I guess, ends his lightweight career, heading to featherweight with a very impressive submission win over Evan Dunham, and that's huge. If he does go to 145, that's a big fight to go off. But Dunham is a slow starter. He got off to a slow start, and I was kicking myself after this fight got going because I talked about it in my bet packs. Donald Cerrone's never lost 2 fights in his career. He always comes back motivated after he loses a fight. This is the situation here, and he blew Evan Dunham out of the water, and that's what it came down to, finishing with a submission. Very impressive. Overall, he's 5-2 in the prelims. Good fights for the most part, very enjoyable. And now let's get to the main card predictions. All right, we kick off the main card in the flyweight division. Ali Bogatinov defeating Tim Elliott by decision. I really like the advice. I had Elliott winning. I predicted Elliott to win this fight, but I thought Bogatinov did enough to win the matchup. I really like Elliott's corner advice they gave him after the first round. He said, "You're making him miss, but you're not making him pay," and that's a big thing. Bogatinov was pushing the action, landing shots, and Elliott was avoiding a lot of the shots, but he wasn't doing enough to convince the judges, "Hey, I'm in this fight too and doing offensive damage." I think that's what it came down to, and Bogatinov landed the headier shots. Again, the 30-27 in favor of the Russian I thought was an absolute joke. I had it 29-28 for him. I thought Tim Elliott didn't have to take 1 round, and I thought that was ridiculous. But nonetheless, the right fighter won, we'll say that. So unfortunately, I was on the fence on this fight when I was doing my predictions. I thought Elliott's size and volume would have played a role. And it would have had he put enough volume on his opponent, because Ali was clearly slowing down, but just not enough to cost him the fight. Up next, Tyron Woodley stops Josh Koscheck by knockout. I had Koscheck winning this fight by decision, was my prediction. It didn't play out. Woodley blasted him early, put the tough veteran in trouble, and never really let up. Woodley hits hard, and that's his MO, I think. Obviously smothering that grinding wrestling type he was known for earlier in his career, but here he seems to throw with big time power, and if he can land like he did against Jay Heron and against Josh Koscheck here, he really has the ability to put guys away, and that's impressive. Again, like Joe talked about before the fight started, he's such a heavily muscled guy that if a fighter can push him into the later stages of a bout, that can cost him. That's kind of what I expected to see Koscheck do. I hope Koscheck doesn't retire. I think he's a draw and he needs to be a little more active as far as I'm concerned. That he should try and line himself up with some fighters that make a little bit more sense. Maybe Josh Koscheck, Martin Kampmann might be an interesting bout to see if that plays over two guys that were formerly at the top of the division and are certainly heading downwards. Good win for Tyron Woodley heading forward. I'm not sure who they'll match him up with, but again, I'm not a big Tyron Woodley fan. Is he winning me over with those knockouts? I said it's more impressive when you start putting these flash knockouts together. That does add a little bit to it, but still, I want to see him consistently. Knockouts, and then when he doesn't get a knockout guy out, win a good decision by just outworking his opponent. Robbie Lawler, Rory McDonald. Excellent fight for both guys, but Rory learned a lesson. He learned that you can't just coast, do just enough to win a fight. He needed to put I think he could have easily been given the first 2 rounds, but he didn't put the stamp on it. He wasn't definitive with his actions, and Robbie Lawler was able to come back, do enough to maybe steal one of those rounds, and clearly when he staggered Rory, take the 3rd round, win the fight, and Robbie Lawler's a veteran. He needed this win, he got this win, and he is right in the title picture, depending on what the scenario is coming out of the main event. For Rory, he's a young guy. He'll go down. Maybe Rory versus the loser of Carlos Condit, Matt Brown, transpires something there. He's got a ton of time to recover. He's still the future of the division as far as at least contending for a title. But this fight should help him to improve, much the way we saw Eric Perez improve after losing to KM Izagaki. I know it's different levels of fighters, but nonetheless, I think Rory McDonald will improve again here and learn that you have to push the action, take advantage of the opportunities you get early on, because you never know what could transpire late. But big fight for Robbie Lawler, big win. Big defeat for Rory McDonald, but not nearly as devastating to his career as had Robbie Lawler lost this fight. Co-main event, Chael got off to an interesting start, pushing Rashad into the cage. Evans turned the tables on him, never really looked back, eventually mounting him, pounding him out. Disappointing fight for Chael Sonnen. I think at this point he recognizes his chances at 205 are pretty limited, having lost to Evans and Jones, and he wouldn't stand a chance against a guy like Glover Teixeira or Alexander Gustafsson after watching this performance. I think I don't think he'll retire. I think he'd be smart. He goes back to 185 and tries to call it somebody like Vitor Belfort or another fight that would get him back into the mix with a victory. For Rashad Evans, even though he won, I'd actually really like to see him go to 185 and contend for the title. I think 205 is going to be tied up for a little while with, as you would assume, Glover Teixeira getting the next shot, probably Alexander Gustafsson after that, and then Daniel Cormier, and however it transpires and plays out. Evans could be quite a ways away from getting an opportunity again, but at 185, with everything the way it's working out, he could find himself in the mix with just another win. So that's the co-main event. At this point, I'm 5-6 and reeling and definitely struggling. Pretty much all hope of any financial gain for the night was all but gone. And let's turn it over to the main event now. All right, now moving to the main event, I had George St-Pierre winning by decision, which he ultimately won by decision, finishing me 6-6 overall. I'll tell you straight up, I had Johnny Hendricks actually winning the fight, though, at the end of the night, 48-47. I gave Johnny rounds 1, 2, and 4, and the champ, George, I gave him rounds 3 and 5, I believe. Again, I've only watched the fight once. I have to go back and review it again before I really, can be sure, but that's the way it played out to me anyway. And as far as controversial is considered, you consider controversial, I understand. You can clearly see at the end of the fight that George St-Pierre is pretty disappointed. He feels like the belt's going home with Johnny Hendricks, and Johnny Hendricks fights for he thinks the belt's coming home with him as well. So as a result, the fighters both kind of lean towards Johnny Hendricks walking away with the title. The judging obviously didn't, and George is still the champion. A couple things to look at. When Johnny won his rounds, he won them definitive. He did a bunch of damage. He hurt George. He was dominant. The rounds that George won, they weren't nearly as clear. He did better, but he didn't walk away with those rounds by any stretch of the imagination. I think that plays with a lot of people, and that's why they think, it was a robbery. And, of course, George looked brutal at the end of the fight versus Johnny's physical damage, other than being a little bit tired, didn't appear to be that significant, which, again, consider if Johnny does a whole bunch of damage in round 1, he could still lose the next 4 rounds of that fight, and it doesn't matter how much damage he did in round 1 if he can't finish the fight. Another thing is, we're not used to seeing George St-Pierre really get battered and bruised, not land takedowns, get taken down himself. These are things that, if George this is not happening in favor of George, we see him as losing the fight because we're used to seeing him run through guys. Well, unfortunately, he ran into a fighter tonight that was just on top of his game and very game challenger and probably should be champion at this point. Nonetheless, George put up a heck of an effort. He stood in there toe-to-toe with a guy who had came in with vaunted, dangerous striking power, who one touch, not even one punch, it seemed, one touch knocked out Martin Kampmann and John Fitch. And George, with all his chin issues, stood in there. He got hurt a couple times, but he stood in there, he took the big shots, he traded with the guy, and he worked a great game plan. It was an excellent effort, and if George opts to retire and never come back, yes, it's a controversial finish, but it's still a strong fight to go out with at the end. Now, George, of course, announcing he might walk away. I could see him taking a year or two off. Maybe he's 32 years old. He'd be getting close to that. He's getting to that age where it could be too late. But still, if he comes back in a year and a half, he's 33. He still has some time to put in a couple good fights and really show what he's capable of. Patch up some, whether it be physical ailments, mental ailments, whatever he needs to do, he could certainly come back. And you have to think with a guy like this, he is forced to go out and fight sharks, the top guy, each and every night. He doesn't get a gimme fight. Oh, here, work on your skills. Let's take a guy down who clearly has wrestling problems, defensive problems, or doesn't hit that hard. He's fighting. Who's next? Robbie Lawler? Potentially Carlos Condit rematch. Who's next for this guy to have to fight? Tarek Saffiedine coming down the pipe. It's shark after shark after shark, and George never gets a break, and that's something to take into consideration here. That's going to weigh on you mentally, especially when he sees Anderson Silva getting knocked out. He saw Brock Lesnar come and go, BJ Penn come and go. All these other very good champions lose their titles. John Bones almost lose his title, and he's going along. Eventually, he's going to get knocked out, or get hurt, or get absolutely battered and bruised, like he did kind of against Johnny Hendricks, but enough to actually clearly cost him the fight. And that's got to weigh on a fighter who knows he's getting up there in age a little bit, and he's facing these hungry, up-and-coming challengers who haven't been through the wars that he's been through, and they're ready to take his title. And eventually, you have to assume it's going to happen, unless he walks out at this point. And that's got to weigh on a fighter mentally and physically, preparing for each fight. So if he does walk away, thank you very much, George, for everything you've done for us. If you walk away for a little bit, I wish you the best in coming back and recovering and getting back in there. Now, on the other side of the coin, before we get to the other side of the coin, Johnny Hendricks, I wasn't overly happy the way he reacted. I understand he's emotional. I understand he thought he won the belt. And again, I thought he won the belt too, so I understand he's disappointed and he's upset. Johnny Hendricks is a good guy, and emotion plays a lot. He sounded off a little bit in the post-fight interview about how he thought he won that belt and blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, sure, go. He's probably going to do it eventually, whether it be against George or for an interim title or for the title if George gets stripped. But nonetheless, good effort on Johnny Hendricks. He looked fantastic. Now, that bald Dana White. Who does this idiot think he is? I have no problem with Dana being mad at the Nevada State Athletic Commission for the judging situation. We've had lots of controversial judging situations and all this crap, and Dana's upset with it. That's fine. But for him to fucking call out George St-Pierre and talk about either retire and get out of here, or give Johnny Hendricks the rematch, you owe him that, you owe the fans that, you owe everyone else that. He doesn't owe anyone shit, you idiot. He doesn't. Who are you to say that? This guy has helped build the promotion. Sure, you're the mouth and you're the guy. You don't get in there and get your head smashed in every couple of months or every week like every fighter does. You're less important to this promotion than almost pretty much 75-80% of the fighters on that roster, because they all go away. Sure, you're going to have to go out and get new people, but you know yourself, Dana White, the importance of the names you have and the names that have been built up. And, you built them. Well, no, you did, but take them away, and the UFC's not nearly as big a deal as you'd like to believe it is. And if they take you away from the UFC, there may be a little bit of a rebuilding period as far as finding someone to replace you. But they'll find someone else. They'll take over. Probably the promotion will be better for it because they don't have you running your mouth and looking like an absolute idiot. And things will be better for it. But for Dana White to call it and say George St-Pierre owes us nothing. He's given us so much of his time, his body, and his well-being to compete and win titles. And sure, he's made money doing it, but at this point, he doesn't owe Johnny Hendricks anything. He doesn't owe the fans anything, and he certainly does not owe Dana White a lick of anything. It's just Dana White needs to shut his mouth. If George St-Pierre says, I'm taking a year off, he's taking a year off. If he says he's taking 2 years off or he's retiring, that's what he's doing. If he says, I'm taking 7 months off and then I will defend my title against Johnny Hendricks, that's fine. George is an honorable man. He would rematch Johnny Hendricks as far as I'm concerned, unless he comes out and says, no, I don't want to fight Johnny Hendricks again. well then, okay, that's his stance on it. But I believe he would rematch Johnny again. He knows it was a close fight. I wish he kind of would have maybe alluded to that a little bit more in his post-fight. But again, he lost memory. He got his head smashed in a number of times. He owes us nothing as far as I'm concerned. And Dana White, how dare you say he owes anyone anything as far as I'm concerned, and take any shots at George St-Pierre. And this is the situation where I wish there was more competition. I'd like to see Bellator and the World Series of Fighting become a little bit more competitive and become options, not for washed-up fighters or fighters at the end of their career like a Rampage Jackson, but for fighters looking for alternative locations to go and compete. I would love to see these promotions start competing with the UFC and open up opportunities and alternate avenues for fighters to go and take part in, simply because then Dana White can't shoot his mouth off. He can't badmouth fighters because he knows the possibility they could leave the organization, and it could cost him significantly if we start to see this talent drain from his promotion to a competing promotion. Either way, Dana White should shut his mouth, let the champion take some time, let him make a decision as to what he wants to do, and if he wants to walk away, like going to the Anderson Silva situation, Anderson Silva saying, I'm done, I don't want to fight anymore, I know it's emotional, I know it's a spur of the moment, and then Dana White going, I think it was Leo Machida came out, so Dana White basically strong-armed Anderson into fighting the rematch, because Dana knows that's pay-per-view dollars, that's money in his pocket if he can get that rematch. That's what he's looking at this scenario as. I hope George decides what he wants to do and makes the decision based on that, and doesn't allow Dana to talk him into a rematch when he's not ready for it, or not willing, or not interested, doesn't have his heart in it. I would love to see if Dana tries to force George, and George say, here's the belt, take it, I'm done. If that's what you're concerned about. Either way, UFC 167 is certainly a controversial ending. Again, I had Johnny Hendricks winning the fight, so please don't badmouth me. Oh, you're a George St-Pierre nut hugger. Well, yeah, I am a huge George St-Pierre fan, but at the same time, I'm a big Johnny Hendricks fan. I interviewed him on my website. He's a great guy. He's probably a future champion. In my opinion, if George just walk away an interim title, I think if he walks away, he should vacate the title. That's what I think. If he's going to leave for just a year or plus, he should vacate the title. I'd like to see Johnny Hendricks versus Robbie Lawler for the title. The winner of Matt Brown, Carlos Condit gets the first title shot. Maybe Tarek Safady and Jake Elmer, the winner of that fight, moves up to. Lots of interesting opportunities for these guys now that if George St-Pierre does take a break. Either way, Dana needs to keep his mouth shut, see how things play out, and hopefully the fans can be respectful and abide by whatever decision these athletes make. UFC 167, the slump continues for me. I'm hoping to turn it around with the next event, which is the Ultimate Fighter 18 finale. It's a little bit tough as far as getting ready for that because there's a lot of fights that aren't announced so I don't know if I'll predict those or not. I'll do my best to get things ready, but we got 2 weeks, a little bit of a break, which I'm looking forward to. Thank you as always for listening and buying my bet packs and paying attention to what I have to say, even when I am completely incoherently incorrect. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions.